Hi everyone. I hope you're all doing well. So this video is should be going along with class 2 of the week of March 23rd. And in this class, we're beginning a new play. The play is called No Exit. It was written by the French existentialist playwright and philosopher named Jean-Paul Sartre. It was first staged in the early 1940s. So this video is going to provide some lecture notes to go along with about the first, not quite half of the play, a little less than that, about between the first third and first half of the play, but it's consistent with the assigned reading as it was first indicated on the syllabus, on the course schedule of the syllabus. So even though the syllabus is going to be moved around a bit, the reading assignments aren't really changing. I also want to kind of talk a little bit about the connection of this video with other tasks and assignments I'm having you do. So we sort of all fell into a rhythm when we were still meeting in class that of these mini quizzes that I like to do, where I would talk to you for about half the class period, or a little more than half the class period, and kind of basically preview what was going to be on the mini quiz. And then for about the last 30 minutes of the quiz, or rather for the last 30 minutes of class, let you take the mini quiz. And so the questions on that mini quiz were really not a surprise. We had basically covered all the material that was on there. In this new online remote learning environment that we're all dealing with now, that's going to be my plan as well. I mean, there's going to be other things, and I encourage you to look at the eCampus announcements for all the updated information and all the expectations as to what you're going to be asked to do on a class-by-class basis. But so there's going to be things like discussion boards and writing journals. But I think this is also going to be a fairly recurring feature, consistent feature, where I give you some lecture notes via these YouTube videos and then ask you at some point to go through the mini quiz that I attach and upload to eCampus. And the mini quiz won't be any surprise. It'll be a lot of the stuff that if you've done the reading and if you listen to this video, it should be pretty manageable for you. Okay, so one of the first things I think we should establish about this play, which again was first performed in 1944, so it's not that big a time jump for where we were in Trifles, which is the earlier 20th century, around 1916 or so. So we're only jumping a couple decades from where we just were in the course. But one of the first things we should note about this is that we're reading a play in translation. All right, so the play was written in French, obviously by Sartre, who's a Frenchman. The French title of the play is Huis Clos. So it's spelled Huisclos. Now, the typical English translation to that, and the one that it was published on, is No Exit. And if you read the first roughly third of the play, you get a sense for why that is. The setting for the play is a drawing room with Second Empire style furniture, and it's a fairly close setting. It's a fairly claustrophobic setting, right? The characters express discomfort. They express some concern or consternation about the fact that they are in this room and there doesn't seem to be any means of escape or exit, hence no exit. If you look at Google Translate, though, or I mean, I just Google Translate it because I'm not fluent in French. Huis Clos actually literally translates to behind closed doors. I think that's pretty interesting because one of the things you're going to see later in the play, when we get to our second class on No Exit, is as the characters become increasingly desperate to escape their circumstances and to leave their room, the door opens. And this really goes to the heart of one of the reasons why Sartre wrote this play. As an existentialist, as a philosopher, he was concerned with human beings' capacity for free will, right? To make choices of their own volition and to follow through on those choices. So let's keep track of this for now. We won't go too much into this, but the literal translation of huis clos is behind closed doors, and that will, as I said, come into effect later in the play. The next point I want to explore with you or for you in this video as an overview of No Exit is something we've addressed certainly with our other plays that we've read thus far this semester. Probably the most prominent example is with Macbeth. The way in which the play draws us into its own world, right? Its own sort of alternate universe. And it's our job as audience members, as readers, to figure out the rules that govern this world. What's going on here? What kind of people are we dealing with? And as I said, the example with Macbeth was a big factor we had to establish was what powers did the witches possess, the Weird Sisters, right? Could they directly harm people, or were they just sort of mischief makers? They could disappear and reappear at will, but could they actually alter someone's future, alter someone's destiny? And we came up with a lot of different examples from the text regarding that. So No Exit, as far as we can tell from the opening scene, and the only stage directions that we're provided with, and this is a difference from Trifles, where the stage directions were rather voluminous, but here, the stage directions are pretty spare. A drawing room in Second Empire style, a massive bronze ornament stands on the mantelpiece. We know that there's only 4 characters, basically, really only 3 main characters, but 4 characters. And right away, we're brought into the play with Garson, who's one of our 3 main characters, accompanied by the room valet. And if you're not familiar with that term, you think of like in a hotel when somebody brings your luggage, your suitcases up to the room for you. That's essentially a valet. And the 2 of them are engaged in small talk. Now, this is part of the universe that we're dealt here, right? That we have to figure out what's going on. As far as we can tell, the fact that there's a character named Valet, he's not given a name, he's just, sort of identified by his function or his purpose. Garson, only a few lines into the play, asks if one gets used to it in time, the furniture, the style of the room. Valet says some do and some don't. Garson says, are all the other rooms like this one? The valet says, how could they be? We cater for all sorts. Again, if you didn't know any better, and I'm assuming that some of you, if not all of you, are encountering this play for the first time, you would imagine that a man is checking into a hotel, his luggage being brought to his room by the valet, and he's just sort of trying to get a feel for it, right? He's just trying to get comfortable or find a sense of belonging or a sense of comfort level. But what you realize as you go further and further into this play is there's something much more sinister, something much more disturbing at play here, right? So it doesn't take many lines going forward to figure out that all of these characters, but especially as we're introduced to Garson and the valet here, these characters enter this world being shown to us on stage in the form of this room with a certain number of assumptions or pre-expectations. And this begins when Garson laughs. In fact, both characters laugh, according to the stage direction. Abruptly, the laugh dies from Garson's face. And then Garson says to the valet, but I say, where are the instruments of torture? The valet says, the what? Garson says, the racks and red-hot pincers and all the other paraphernalia. Valet says, oh, you must have your little joke, sir. So I think what we realize is that this is some form of hell that the characters are being escorted to, right? And this is all sort of cosmic joke, but one that's very real, as you can tell from the stage direction, that the laugh dies. Think about how telling, right, that choice of word is there. How the joke dies for Garson, and he realizes the predicament that he's in. And more as the next characters are brought into the room to share the space. First it's Inez and then it's Estelle later on. We get more and more information. The audience is clued a bit more and more into what's going on here. Now, the setting of hell is certainly nothing new throughout literature. Probably our greatest example, or our most famous example of depictions of hell in literature is Dante's Inferno. And what we know from Dante's Inferno is Dante, who was an Italian poet who lived in the 13th century. Dante imagined the Inferno, which is just the Italian word for hell, as this very structured, very planned sort of environment in which sinners were populated throughout hell on different levels according to the gravity of their sin and the severity of their punishment. And so I've been cycling through some images here on the video to kind of demonstrate this, that the primary sort of mode of punishment here, of torture, and this probably goes along with our popular conceptions of hell and it being very hot and there being a devil with a pitchfork and things like that, and they're red and black, is that hell is a physical place. Right? Hell is a place to be endured, that we're put there if we do wrong on earth, if we commit sins, if we're evil on earth. And I think one of the things that the play shows us is a very sort of revolutionary turnaround from that image of hell that Dante gives us in the Inferno. I mean, we even experience it through character dialogue in Macbeth. Right? Remember when the character says hell is murky? Lady Macbeth says that. And Macbeth's own fear that if he assassinates Duncan, that he'll go straight to hell after he's dead, and that's one of his main reasons for pause, is that this is a place, rather, sort of a place that exists in the afterlife that you don't want to go to, and that if you go to it, you're going to be suffering physical torment. And the dialogue early on in the play, particularly between Garson and the valet, sort of capitalizes on the audience's and the characters' sense of preconception. Like what constitutes hell? Primarily that it's a place that one suffers physical torments there, but this play shows us that it's something different. The last point I want to lay out for you here builds on the previous few minutes of discussion from this video of hell being a physical place, as imagined by Jean-Paul Sartre in the play No Exit, but not really resembling the common perception of hell that most people have, and that we've all had since we were children. Hell being a hot place full of physical torments with a devil and pitchfork and all that. But rather hell being imagined as a place where psychological torment occurs. So I want to refer to sort of a thread of dialogue here that makes reference to these sorts of more psychological or emotional torments. And it begins with Garson and Valet's discussion over the first few pages of the play. And I'm going to refer to the PDF that I linked to on eCampus as the common edition that we're all going to be using, with the idea that maybe not all of you were able to grab your textbooks before leaving campus. So after they've established that Garson is really mistaken, there are no racks and red hot pincers and other paraphernalia as they allude to at the top of page 3. Farther down that page, Valet points out sort of the ridiculousness of some of Garson's comments, like a toothbrush. Like, what do you need a toothbrush here for? So a little more than halfway down the page, Garson says, "One never sleeps, I take it." And Valet says, "That's so." Garson says, "Just as I expected, why should one sleep?" A little bit farther down, he begins to put this in perspective. He says, toward the end of page 3, "So it comes to this, one doesn't need rest. Why bother about sleep if one isn't sleepy? That stands to reason, doesn't it? Wait a minute, there's a snag somewhere, something disagreeable. Why, now, should it be disagreeable? Ah, I see, it's life without a break." And on the next page, this discussion continues. Garson observes that Valet never blinks. And he said it's really a disturbing image for him to talk to someone that never blinks. And Garson sort of explains this because the Valet's not following him. The blinking, he says at the top of page 4, we move ours up and down. Blinking, we call it. It's a small black shutter that clicks down and makes a break. And he describes it as this sort of temporary break that we all take from light, from sunlight, from daylight, from just having our eyes open all the time. And there's an insinuation here that it's not simply a physical act of blinking one's eyes to keep our eyes open all the time, but it's more of a metaphoric thing, that if we have to face all of life and life's travails and its challenges and obstacles all the time with our eyes open, it might just be too much for us to handle. And Garson alludes to this down about halfway down page 4. So one has to live with one eyes open all the time. And the valet quibbles on the word live, reminding us that these are all people who are no longer living. These are all, souls in hell. Garson says, don't let's quibble over words. With one eyes open forever, always broad daylight in my eyes and in my head. And then a short silence takes him. So we've established here that, certainly we're all probably, feeling this now, being in isolation due to the coronavirus and social distancing. But, having to face things and having to look at unpleasant thoughts and unpleasant images and realities all the time without a break, that's a form of psychological torture. Now, this is when Garson is still alone, but and this becomes more of the premise of the play, the thesis, if you will, of this play, is that first Inez and then eventually Estelle are introduced into the room, and their interactions form the basis for the ongoing psychological and emotional torture. Now, Inez, when she first comes in on page 5, about halfway down the page, she makes the same mistake that Garson makes. She says, Garson says to her, I beg your pardon, who do you suppose I am? And Inez says, you? Why, the torturer, of course. Garson looks startled and bursts out laughing. Well, that's a good one. So Garson here is playing the role that the valet played a few pages earlier. He's already settled into the reality of what they're facing, and he recognizes that this is sort of a silly notion at this point. Now on to page 6, there's an important thing that's established. This is still just Garson and Inez, right? So on page 6, Inez notices something sort of annoying that Garson does. He twists his mouth. She says, can't you keep your mouth still? You keep twisting it all the time. It's grotesque. So sorry, I wasn't aware of it. Inez says, that's just what I reproach you with. There you are. You talk about politeness. You don't even try to control your face. Remember, you're not alone. You've no right to inflict the sight of your fear on me. Garson says, how about you? Aren't you afraid? What would be the use? There was some point in being afraid before, while one still had hope. There's no more hope, Garson says, but it's still before. We haven't yet begun to suffer. Inez says that's so. In other words, she's agreeing. And then a short silence. Well, what's going to happen? Garson says, I don't know. I'm waiting. And that's when Estelle, the third sinner, is brought into the room. So there's this, and this creates a layer of irony, certainly in the play, that these people, as the play goes on, keep believing, well, we haven't yet begun to suffer. The official torture has not yet begun, when in fact, they already are suffering. They already are, as long as they understand where they are and what kind of predicament they're in, that is the psychological torturing that's happening. So Estelle comes in, and we get more backstory of each of the characters. And lest we not forget, page 10, while we become more familiar with these characters, while we learn more about them and we relate more to them, I think Sartre doesn't want us to forget something that Inez states a little past the halfway point on page 10. Inez, we are criminals, murderers, all three of us. We're in hell, my pets. They never make mistakes, and people aren't damned for nothing. I believe, I might be wrong, it's going off the top of my head, but I believe this is the first time the word hell is stated in the play here. So just in case you haven't been paying attention for the previous 9 pages, this sort of confirms it. She calls them damned souls. That's us, all three. Now, keep in mind the comment from about 4 pages earlier when Garson says we haven't yet begun to suffer, and they're waiting and they're wondering how this is all going to happen. Well, Inez, who as you read, you'll recognize she's the most pragmatic of the three. She's the most willing to state things as they are. Inez, a few lines from the bottom of page 10, with the stage direction confronting him fearlessly, but with a look of vast surprise. Well, well, I understand now and know why they've put us three together. Garson says, I advise you to think twice before you say any more. Inez, and sort of not afraid of what he's saying at all, says, wait, you'll see how simple it is. Childishly simple. Obviously, there aren't any physical torments. You agree, don't you? And yet we're in hell, and no one else will come here. We'll stay in this room together, the three of us, forever and ever. In short, there's someone absent here, the official torturer. Now that connects to something that she concludes on the final page of the reading for today, page 11, at the very, very top. She says, I mean that each of us will act as torturer of the two others. And Garson, doesn't want to believe this, and neither does Estelle. I'll never be your torturer. I wish neither of you harm. But sort of what they don't recognize and what they don't believe yet, and this is where the irony is, because irony in a play comes from when the audience recognizes something that the characters do not on stage, is that simply the three of them being together in this uncomfortable room, having to essentially put up with one another for all of eternity, is itself a torture. And this leads to the sort of the most famous line from this play that we're going to get toward the very, very end of the reading for next class, when Garson says, hell is other people. And again, I sort of can't miss the opportunity here to point out that if you're currently stuck in a house with your family or your roommates, and you're not allowed to leave the house because of the lockdown, and you maybe are experiencing this right now, that you're being in close quarters with others without the possibility of leaving. But this goes back to the play's thesis once again, that hell as we imagined it is perhaps not hell, at least not with the popular conception. It's more of it's a place of psychological torture. And this is consistent with much of what we've had in our plays to this point. And Macbeth certainly experiences this. His torture, his punishment, if you will, after he murders Duncan, is that he can't sleep, and he imagines horrible things, and he suffers from a sort of psychological guilt that he just can't shake. Lady Macbeth, too, to the point where she becomes a sleepwalking cipher toward the end of the play. Antigone, too, is a sort of a victim of her own ideology. She suffers because of her beliefs. Trifles, we don't really see what happens to Mrs. Wright, but certainly whatever sort of abuse she suffered, it may have been physical, but you imagine that the emotional torment that she suffered, the physical isolation, and not having joy in her life at the hands of her husband, was similar to all the other things that our characters have experienced. So I've tried to lay out some of the basic premises of this play in this video, starting with the title, No Exit, sort of the dual meaning there, going into some of the rules of this universe, the rules that govern how things work in the afterlife, in Sartre's imagination, how hell might look when portrayed differently, and then finally how characters are recognizing those rules, how they're understanding the sort of punishment they're receiving here. Now, we don't know necessarily yet what they've done exactly. They've started to hash out some of those details, but you'll get a lot more of that in the reading for next time. So I'm going to end the video here and just remind you that you've got a few things to do now. You've got a writing journal that you can complete, and you'll save that as you've always done when we were meeting face-to-face in class at the beginning of the semester. There's the discussion board on eCampus that you can complete, and then you can comment on a few other people's threads that they've begun. And then there's a mini quiz, and then the mini quiz should, as you'll see, follow right from the three different topics that I outlined here in this video. So I hope this wasn't too bad for you. I hope you get something out of this video and the reading so far. I'm going to sign off, and I'll be posting more as we go along on No Exit and as we go forward with other texts as well. All right, that's it. Thanks.